I beg to move that the committee has considered the draft European Research Infrastructure Consortium Amendment EU Exit Regulations 2018. We are discussing what I'm going to call ERICs as opposed to ERNIs today, which are indeed the European Research Infrastructure Consortia. These, I know the committee will know, but just to explain, these are bodies set up to support major international science and research collaboration within the EU, and they effectively provide a legal structure enabling countries and organisations to work together to tackle international research challenges. They are primarily funded through ERIC member contributions, not the EU budget, and they are expected to last for many years. Indeed, they often have lifetimes of decades. Crucially, any country can be a member of an ERIC, and as I mentioned, they are not funded through an EU budget, so there is no requirement to contribute to an EU budget in order to receive funding into an ERIC structure. The UK has been a long-standing member of the ERIC structure. We currently host two ERICs, the European Social Survey based at City University London, and Instruct, an ERIC looking at integrated structural biology based at Oxford University. But we are indeed a member of 12 of these particular consortia. By the end of last year, we had contributed roughly 64 million to the structure, and the total annual contribution that we pay in is approximately 1.6 million a year, although it doesn't include our financial contributions to the European Spallation Source ERIC, a large one which we have contributed 165 million to so far. These are extremely important projects. They feed into the research communities right across the UK, including marine sciences, astrophysics, human health, welfare and societal changes, and they essentially provide world-class collaboration for our world-leading scientists. For example, the Integrated Structural Biology ERIC gives the UK scientists working within the scheme access to a specific flagship nanotechnology facility in Belgium, technology which we do not have access to domestically. Mr. Sharma, the legislation before us today is simply technical and drafting amendments. And they are essentially designed to facilitate our ongoing participation in ERICs, regardless of the outcome of our negotiations with the EU. Participation in an ERIC is open to any country, as I mentioned. As such, there is therefore no legal reason why the UK could not continue to participate in these projects. However, we would need to satisfy the requirement for third country membership for an ERIC. And this instrument addresses deficiencies in the retained EU ERIC regulation, the legal framework, if you like, for the creation and operation of the consortia that arise as a result of the United Kingdom's exit from the EU. And as I said, it does not implement new policy. And effectively it enables us to participate should we wish to going forward. For example, this instrument removes provisions that are for the European Commission to enforce, such as when an ERIC changes its statutes. Additionally, provisions that relate to Commission activities, such as production of annual activity reports by the ERIC, are also removed. And the amended regulations will ensure that ERICs continue to have the same attributes, such as legal personality, as they had under the ERIC regulation as it applied on exit day. I am aware that the European Statutory Instruments Committee, who have considered this instrument, reported on the 5th of September and noted the role of the Court of the European Justice, the CJEU, in ERICs. And briefly, I wanted to explain why this SI makes no amendment to that role post-exit. Membership of any ERIC requires recognition that the Court of Justice of the EU has a limited role to play. Just as there would be, if we had a trade deal with a third-party country, there would be, if you like, conversations and an appeal route to a third-party adjudicator. Specifically, if a dispute arises between ERIC members or the ERIC itself and a member, the court could be asked to form an opinion on whether an ERIC member is fulfilling its obligations under ERIC statutes. This is completely different from the Court of Justices of the EU's role in ruling on compliance by EU member states within the Treaty on European Union and the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. That refers to the broad acquis of law underpinning those treaties. This refers specifically to the obligations under the ERIC statutes. And this is not an area where penalties could be imposed for non-compliance. Any remedy could be applied or would be applied by the individual ERIC in line with its own rules, rules that the members of the consortium agree to sign up to when they join. Therefore, if we choose to remain as members of existing ERICs or to enter additional ERICs and pick up the benefits that our world-class scientists would like to achieve, the influence, if you like, of the ECJ in adjudicating on the statutes of the ERIC would have no influence on our UK sovereignty. We, of course, remain free to leave ERICs at any time, at a time of our choosing, although there are, of course, rules as to when we can leave, which would be entirely consistent with these multi-million-pound research projects. So in conclusion, Mr Sharma, the UK's leadership in science and innovation is supported and strengthened by international collaboration, and projects such as ERIC help facilitate such collaboration. In turn, this helps further consolidate a world-leading reputation for science, research and innovation. Should we decide to retain membership of existing ERICs post-exit or to join new ones, we need to comply with the membership rules relating to these bodies, and this is the purpose of the statutory instrument. Mr Sharma, I would hope that we would confine remarks of the committee to the very specific technical points relating to ERICs, rather than a broader conversation about European science and innovation, which I am not going to answer today, but I do hope that we can reach an agreement. These remain an important part of our international scientific collaboration, and I therefore commend these regulations to the House.
Thank you. The question is that the committee has considered the draft European Research Infrastructure Consortium Amendment EU Exit Regulations 2018.
Thank you, Mr Sharma, and it is a real pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship and on such an important subject because obviously with the Article 50 deadline so close and the government in such disarray, as demonstrated by the recent resignation of the former science minister, we need the process of scrutiny which the SIs allow more than ever. Now, science is a great British success story supporting jobs and growth across the country, from Newton to Hawking, from Lovelace to Franklin. British scientific giants have bestrode the world. And it's a global success story. We are the partner of choice in science and innovation for our European neighbours and indeed countries across the world. British science has benefited from what Dr. Sarah Mann, Director of the Campaign for Science and Engineering, describes as a web of collaborations, shared facilities and cross-border research programmes that has led to a rich flow of ideas, people and research funds into our country. And according to the government's own 2013 report, it's the increasing internationalisation of UK science, powered in part by European collaborations, which has allowed us to surpass the United States in science productivity. Now, the ERICs, as the Minister has explained, are one of the legal forms which underpin this collaboration, and they are crucial to the success of British science. We take a leading role in many of these pan-European organisations, with facilities often located in our country. Instruct ERIC, for example, an ERIC set up to support structural biology research infrastructure, has 6 centres in the UK. Excel ERIC, which provides laboratory infrastructure for research into carbon capture and storage, a very important area, has a near-surface gas monitoring facility in the UK and 6 CO2 capturing facilities in the UK. But even when these facilities are not directly located here, participation in ERICs gives our researchers access to facilities, data, knowledge and contracts that would otherwise be inaccessible. And that's not just beneficial for public research organisations, but also for the private sector, both through the tendering of construction opportunities to private businesses and the use of ERICs to disperse funding for research projects to which private organisations may be contributing. So ERICs are therefore a really important interface between research funding at the state and pan-European level and the research endeavours of public and private institutions. Strengthening this interface will be crucial if we are to achieve the ambition, shared on both sides of the House, of meeting and indeed on our side of surpassing the OECD average of 2.4% of GDP invested in research and development. So this SI is an attempt to pave the way for that continuation of current laws governing the establishment of ERICs when we leave the European Union. And as I won't go into the details as the Minister set out, but we on this side are satisfied that this SI does not represent a policy change. The government's impact assessment says that the SI will not have a direct impact on business and research organisations, and that is true in the strictest sense. The SI does not change the process for joining an ERIC or the rules under which they are governed. And crucially, as the Minister set out, countries do not need to be a member of the European Union or its framework programmes to be a member of an ERIC. So we will continue to participate in ERICs, even if we are not able to join the Horizon Europe as an associate member. But I just want to emphasise that it would be naive to assume, as the Minister seemed to be doing, that the level of our participation in European framework programmes will have no impact on whether the UK continues to join new and existing ERICs. Science funding and investment has already been severely knocked by the chilling impact of not knowing what our relationship with Horizon will be after Brexit. Funding for UK science from Horizon 2020 was down a fifth last year, while more and more universities tell me that Brexit chaos is freezing them out of funding opportunities. It's vital that we secure associated status of Horizon Europe, as CASE and the Royal Society have called for and Labour has pledged. I'm glad that the government is committed to seeking this, but concerned by the lack of any apparent contingency plan if negotiations fail to secure it. This uncertainty is compounded by confusion at this domestic level. Despite their lofty rhetoric on science spending, the government has not brought forward a long-term funding plan. Disbursement through the Challenge Fund is uneven and unpredictable, while measures to support innovation through the tax code are continuously being introduced and then axed. Finally, and with the government's long-anticipated white paper on migration supposedly around the corner, British science needs clarity on how and to what extent it will be able to access European talent after Brexit. You know, maybe we'll just have Brexit instead. In conclusion, we will approve the SI as we believe it is necessary for the continued functioning of our science sector post-Brexit. But the government would do well to consider what else it needs to do to ensure that we continue to be the scientific partner of choice for the world.
Angela Eagle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sharma, and it's a pleasure to be in the same committee with you in the chair. I'm a member of the House of Commons European Statutory Instruments Committee, which actually decided to refer this back and ask the government to have an affirmative debate about it. And we didn't do that because, perhaps that's why I'm here, I don't know. We didn't do that because we wanted to cause trouble, but simply because we felt that the structure that the SI amends is so important to the UK that we needed some explanation on the record from the Minister, the Honourable Lady for Devisers, which would say a little bit about future policy. She's begun to do that, but I just have a few questions I wanted to ask her about how she and her department see our sort of ongoing approach to the ERICs evolving over time. She rightly said that we had two ERICs which actually are based in this country, hosted here, and I wonder whether she might like to tell us what effect, if any, she thinks that our leaving the European Union will have on the future work and size and workload of the ERICs that are hosted here, and whether there might be moves to take them somewhere else as a result of our move from EU status to non-EU status. I wonder whether she would also reflect publicly on if there are any possible implications in the way that the ERIC process works, especially with respect to the setting up of new ERICs, for our move from EU state to third country status, and whether she feels that her department need to think about, rather than just doing a technical amendment, which is important but not perhaps the whole story, whether she and her department have in mind policy changes or administrative changes, changes of approach, to ensure that in that move from EU member state to third country status in the ERIC structures, that we we need to shore up our involvement. Does she feel that as a third country we will have any possibility in future of hosting a new ERIC? And as my honourable friend from the front bench said, given that we don't have any idea of what an immigration policy will look like, and that the white paper on that has been delayed until after the meaningful vote in a couple of weeks' time, can she give us some indication on her department's approach to immigration policy? Because certainly when I was campaigning for this country to remain in the EU, and I went round a lot of universities, one of the main things that they told me about was how catastrophic for the potential for research and being a leader in the field it is to have a narrowed rather than a wider approach to immigration, and particularly collaboration across borders. And those of us who have been involved in science policy in the past know that that cross-border cooperation without barriers is actually a key, as knowledge gets more and more specialised, to keeping this country at the forefront of future policy. So I wonder if she'd say a few, give us a few indications of her department's thoughts on these important issues, so we can set a policy context for the SIs in front of us. The issue isn't that these SIs aren't technical, because they are, but the context in which ERICs have operated in the past is now going to change in the future. And I wonder if the Minister would give us a little bit more of her thought processes and her department's approach to how we're going to deal with trying to ensure that our commitment to the ERICs, but our capacity to be involved in a leading role in perhaps new ERICs, will be projected most effectively in the future in this new context.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. Well, thank you for a series of interesting and helpful questions, which I will try to answer. So, the Honourable Lady on your position, well, I think there were a series of questions about sort of what is our post-Brexit position, if you like, relating both to ERICs and both to the scientific leadership that we wish to exert. And I think it's absolutely right that we continue to make this. I should have declared an interest, Michelle. I am married to a world-leading scientist, Professor O'Neill of Cambridge University, and he has participated not in ERICs but in a number of European-wide research projects. And so I know very clearly what are the risks and the benefits of not continuing or continuing international collaboration. And I think that point about the talent pool is really significant, because, of course, scientists aren't fungible. And part of the reason we have been able to attract so much inward investment, both domestically and also from private sector sources, as well as from overseas, including Horizon, where as of the 28th of February we were second only to Germany in the funding commitments we have received, is that we do have an astonishingly strong research base, science and innovation research base. Arguably where we need to focus is on scale-up to get from research to commercialisation, which has nothing to do with our position in the EU. It's to do with our will, if you like, to harness industrial investment after the early stage R&D. But I do remain very positive about the outlook for, I and the department remain positive about the outlook for the UK's role in participating in world-leading science and innovation going forward. And of course, we've taken a couple of domestic measures. One is to add an additional £7 billion to the public funding of R&D from 2017 to 2020, the biggest ever increase that's ever been made, as I understand it. And also working through sector deals to try and align the principles of the industrial strategy with very practical steps that different sectors are taking forward, including on R&D specific projects, places, and individuals funded through those sector deals. And it feels to me entirely fundamental to the UK's progress. And by the way, this I believe should have happened regardless of our decision around Brexit, to harness that world-leading science and innovation base in a way that does deliver more of an alignment with the industrial strategy. Yes, of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way and also for the tone of her response to our contributions. I would just like to say that I would take argument with her proposition that scale-ups are, that the ability of UK companies to scale up is not related to whether or not we are part of the European Union. When the access to the funding is one thing, but it's access to talent and also the potential markets for our scale-ups is obviously related to whether we have access to one of the world's biggest trading blocks.
Well, the Honourable Lady is right, which is why the proposed framework going forward is to have as close as possible alignment on a goods basis for exactly that point. But she will know, because I know she speaks to many universities and researchers, that actually we have an endemic problem of scale. What tends to happen is the IP is sold overseas, and often the commercialisation stage, and indeed the full commercialisation of projects and services is done by overseas companies rather than the IP being held back in the UK. But I'm digressing slightly, Mr. Sharma, forgive me. I was asked a specific question. I'm going to come on to the migration points, and I do want to thank the Right Honourable Lady for her contributions on that committee. I know she's got a lot of stuff going on that, and these are important questions. Third countries cannot host ERICs. So there is a question about hosting versus participation, and of course we host 2, we are members of 12. But we have said, and this relates to our future negotiations, which are spelled out in the political declaration, a desire to continue to do so, hoping again that our special status, if you like, as being one of the absolute world leaders, I can't remember the patent numbers, but I believe we're up there with economies very much larger than ours, will allow us, if you like, some special status through the ERICS hosting. So I believe that is part of the future negotiations. The Honourable... Yes, of course.
I thank her for that, and clearly it is worrying that third countries can't host ERICS when we're about to become a third country. And I wonder if she would just indicate the sort of timescale for and the kind of approach or process that will be in place for trying to negotiate ERIC 2, or whatever you want to call it.
I will clarify my remarks to the Honourable Lady in writing, but I believe it forms part of the negotiation we're having around Horizon 2020 and the entire site and innovation. So it is part of the ongoing negotiations before we actually have an affirmative, a legal political declaration, if that makes sense, a future framework for going forward. But I will clarify that in writing to the Honourable Lady. The Honourable Lady did ask me a very important point about migration. And she is absolutely right. Again, we have been enormously benefited by the incredible talent of those who come to study in the UK and who often choose to remain and work here, and that must be absolutely continued. She asked me to say a little bit about policy, and of course I don't want to preempt my Right Honourable friend, the Home Secretaries, but essentially the policy position we have taken on migration is one that is entirely consistent with wanting to remain a world leader in science and innovation. And that has been very much stated in every public declaration. It's been very much reiterated in every conversation that we have. And we have also made a series of changes in the existing immigration rules since January 2018 to support this objective. So, for example, we've doubled the number of exceptional talent Tier 1 visas for those qualifying in science, engineering, humanities, medicine, etc. We've expanded the number of institutions who can sponsor international researchers, making it easier for research councils to bring in researchers for 2 years under a temporary work route. We've waived the resident labour market test for superannuary international research as a member of the sponsored research teams, and of course we've enabled faster switching between student visas, which are Tier 4, and highly skilled Tier 2 visas. I will say, yes, I will.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way on that. And obviously any expansion and increased flexibility in that area is going to be very important to maintaining the UK's leading place as a centre of scientific and research excellence. But the issue that I think she'll probably be more familiar than me, given the announcement she made about her own personal arrangements, the thing that seemed to me when I met a lot of university researchers going around the country that concerned them more than anything was the bureaucracy around granting of visas and the kind of time that it took to get researchers in from non-EU countries was much greater, as well as getting UK researchers into third countries too, that there's a bureaucracy and a timing issue and an uncertainty about whether these will be granted, which makes it much easier for them to have organised their research where there's free movement. And I think that is the key issue that will bind us in the future if we don't get it right.
Well, the Right Honourable Lady makes an important point as always, and of course she's right to distinguish from EU and global talent pools. Of course we want to attract the best and the brightest from wherever they come from to work in the research and innovation sector, to be part of the industrial strategy and to benefit the wider UK economy. There is something which is not in my briefing notes, but she might find interesting, which is I am told that one of the challenges we have is, of course, we don't have enough homegrown students, particularly women, coming forward from our own education systems to be grown into these research and innovation positions. And one might hope over a period of time that we would be able to see more acceleration of women and others through our educational system reaching to this point where we can actually be filling more of these really important research positions from UK talent. But regardless of that, we will still be open to the best and the brightest to support our world-leading research and innovation base. And as we've been absolutely clear, both in public and in conversations across government, we want to make sure that we work closely with the research sector to ensure that our visa arrangements are closely aligned to the sector's needs. But the Honourable Lady makes an important point. It's not just the availability of research, it's the ease of access. And if we are bidding in a global talent pool, we must make sure that we have very streamlined activities. I'll of course give way.
Toby Perkins.
I understand what the Honourable Lady was saying a moment ago about not wanting to preempt the Home Secretary. Many of us wish that he had preempted her, in fact, and indeed was going to have his white paper out in time for the meaningful vote. Now, note, many of the statements made within Part 2 were made by the person described as the Minister of State for University Science, Research and Innovation, the Honourable Member for Surrey East, who we all know resigned from the government a few days ago. Can the Honourable Lady tell us, would he have been doing this statement if he hadn't resigned from his post? And what should we read into the fact that he's made a number of statements that tell us we shouldn't be worried, but now has so little confidence in the government's approach, he no longer wants to be a part of it?
But again, I fear, Mr Sharma, we're straying well outside the technical provisions of this bill, but if you're happy for me to answer.
I was going to say that remain in what the details we have in front of us. I don't think it's a part of it. The Minister, you don't have to answer that. Thank you.
Nice try. Right, well, Mr Sharma, sorry, if there are no other questions, then I'm so sorry, I got up. I was looking for any more interventions, but there are none. Of course.
I just do feel it's really important to emphasise in the context of ERICS that whilst we all wish for more women to not to come forward but to be encouraged to be part of science, and speaking as an engineer, as a woman engineer, but the virtue, if you like, of collaboration is that different people from different disciplines and different backgrounds come together to create innovation, and that is not an issue with regard to whether it's homegrown women accessing the skill pool.
Oh, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right, and I think she rather supports the point I was making earlier, which is scientists are not fungible, and this is why I believe we should maintain very strong confidence in the UK's incredible reputation in science and innovation, because of course we do have world-leading science bases, world-leading research, and that is entirely strengthened by collaboration, as she says, and projects such as ERIC will help facilitate such collaboration. And I'm grateful to the committee, Mr Sharma, for allowing this piece of legislation to proceed, because of course it is just simply a technical clearing out of some rules that will no longer apply, but it does enable us to maintain our membership of ERIC's post-exits or to join new ones, and therefore I commend this regulation to the House.
Thank you. The question is that the committee has considered the draft European Research Infrastructure Consortium Amendment EU Exit Regulation 2018. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.